I would like to call to order the RTA Audit, Safety, and Compliance and Real Estate Committee. Teresa, if you could call the roll, please.
Mayor Kumar,
Here.
Ms. Moss, Mr. Joyce, Ms. Mersman, Mayor Weiss.
Here.
Okay, we have a fill-in today. Mr. Sleesman will be filling in so that this committee can have a quorum. Mr. Sleesman?
Here.
We have 3 committee members present. You have a quorum.
Great. There is the approval of the May 9th minutes. Mayor Weiss, is there such a motion?
Move approval.
I'm going to second that since Mr. Sleesman was not here. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Abstentions? Okay. Motion carries. The first item up, we have Judy Lincoln, Director of Risk Management, to discuss the casualty insurance program. Judy, take it away.
But, okay, hear me now. So good morning, Chairman Kumar, members of the committee. My name is Judy Lincoln. I'm the Director of Risk Management here, and I'm here to give you an overview of RTA's casualty insurance program, which renews on September 1st this year. I would like to introduce Barbara Goodwin, who is our insurance broker. Barbara, are you on the line? She's here. Okay, she is the Senior Vice President and Team Leader for the RTA account at USI Insurance Services. So just in case you guys have any questions that are too hard for me, we have Barb. Okay, so moving on. Oh, do I have the clicker? I have the clicker. Okay, so first some background on the casualty insurance program itself. RTA maintains a casualty insurance program for protection of its assets against catastrophic loss. There are actually 3 insurance programs, the first being the excess liability insurance program, and by far the largest, contains general, rail, and auto liability coverages. It has a $95 million per occurrence coverage limit with a $5 million self-insured retention. This program responds to bodily injury and property damage to third parties that may arise out of any number of losses that occur in the course of our operations. So this is where we get our coverage if there's a severe bus collision, a derailment, God forbid, a bridge collapse, any other number of small incidents that occur throughout our daily operations. The second policy is our excess workers' compensation policy, has a $10 million coverage limit with a $750,000 self-insured retention. The third policy is the public officials liability policy, which also includes employment practices liability coverage. That policy has a $5 million coverage limit with a $250,000 self-insured retention on the public officials side and a $500,000 self-insured retention on the employment practices side. How does RTA procure this insurance? Excess liability insurance markets must be accessed via a broker. There are no direct writers of these coverages, so we can't go to Fireman's Fund or Travelers or Zurich and say, give us a quote for our general liability insurance. We have to work through a commercial insurance broker. So RTA conducts an RFP process to select and retain a casualty insurance broker. They are selected based on their expertise.
Judy, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but the sound, we have to reconnect the sound.
WebEx.
In the back, you guys, we need to reconnect.
www.webex.com.
Okay. The broker is selected based on their expertise in the commercial insurance market, including our industry sector, which of course is rail, transit, and transportation. Together, RTA and the broker approach a number of insurance markets with what we call an underwriting submission. This is an extensive document including a great deal of information on RTA's operations and exposures, a lot of detail on our loss experience, a lot of information on our RTA safety culture, and we use all this to negotiate the best partnerships possible with the insurance markets and eventually the best program for RTA in terms of coverage and pricing. So a little bit more about each line of coverage very quickly. The Public Officials and Employment Practices Policy. This policy provides liability protection to board members, directors, and officers, as well as RTA, the entity, for alleged wrongful acts by directors and officers, committee members, or employees. Policy also provides insurance coverage for employment practices claims, such as wrongful termination, discrimination, sexual harassment, and the like. So now for some renewal results, and I am happy to say as a result of Tony being willing to share this meeting with me, we do have all the renewal results for all three programs. So for the largest program, the excess liability, the expiring premium is $1,750,768. The renewal premium is $1,785,783. A 2% increase. This is a very favorable result. This market has been very difficult for the last several years. It has stabilized some, but we were told to expect up to a 7.5% increase based on a strategy meeting that took place in July. So a 2% increase, needless to say, is a very good result, and we are told by our carriers and our brokers that our account is still priced well below our peers. We did budget for a 10% increase, so again, savings there. This is a quota share program. It is not written with one insurance carrier. It's far too large to be written by one insurance carrier. So it's what we call a quota share program, and there are participants from domestic, London, and Bermuda insurance markets. Excess workers' compensation policy renewal results. Due to a marketing effort with the few carriers that actually do write this coverage for public entities, and there are not many, we were able to generate some competition among markets, and we were able to achieve a 12.5% rate reduction. Our existing carrier, Safety National, is now offering a lower premium despite our payroll increase of 7.5%. That percentage increase is calculated using projected 22 payrolls versus projected 23 payrolls, because that's all we have available to us at the time that we're doing the negotiations with the market. So that's what they look at. And so the end result is our renewal premium of $275,355 versus the expiring of $292,000, actually generates a $17,000 savings, much better than the expected result given that the most recent guidance we got from the broker looking at other accounts in this sector we're experiencing between 5 and 7.5% rate increases. So excellent result. Last but not least, the public officials employment practices renewal. The incumbent carrier is AIG. The particular insurance company writing the policy is National Union. The expiring premium is $99,900. The renewal premium is $100,900, a 1% increase. And we did budget for a 5% increase in accordance with our broker's guidance. So, in summary, the combined result for all three insurance policies is a renewal premium of $2,162,038 versus expiring of $2,143,510, an increase of less than 1% at almost $200,000, or 8.4% under the budget of $2,361,000. So very pleased with the overall result. Staff does request that the Audit, Safety, Compliance, and Real Estate Committee recommend to the Board of Trustees the purchase of casualty insurance from various insurance underwriters through USI Services National, Inc., RTA's casualty insurance broker, in a total amount not to exceed $2,162,038 for a period of 12 months. I would like to just turn it over to Barb Goodwin for a second, if she's here. Barbara, are you on?
Yes, I am. Good morning, everybody.
She wanted to share with you just a little bit of feedback from the insurance markets before I ask for questions. So go ahead, Barb.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, a lot of what the risk management group has put together, as Judy mentioned, really thorough specifications. And also, we do underwriting presentations, which are very impressive. And as a result of all that, the underwriters feel very comfortable with RTA being a superior risk, given it, getting a little bit of echo here, but superior loss experience, attention to safety, risk control, and risk management. So I think all of that, the fact that RTA is a superior risk and is able to demonstrate that, has really helped us negotiating this very competitive program. And I have to say that this is definitely the best result we've had this year for any of our clients. So just really applaud you all for all the efforts that you make.
Well, thank you very much for your hard work. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any questions?
Questions from the board?
Yeah, first, Judy, congratulations. I mean, that's is phenomenal.
Thank you. It
phenomenal
feels good
result.
for once. It hasn't felt this way in a few years.
Yeah, I'll bet. Maybe two questions. One, I'm assuming that all the basic terms and conditions that were in the previous policy, the expiring policy, are carried forward. There are no changes in the SIR or anything like, or the.
Exactly right. We were offered actually a few alternates in SIRs on the excess workers' compensation program. We've been holding ours down to $750,000, as you saw in the presentation. Almost every other account, as Barb will attest, carries at least $1 million self-insured retention. We've been hanging on to our $750,000 for as long as we can. They offered us a quote for $1 million. It was $24,000 cheaper. We said, no, we're not going to up our deductible by $250,000 for that small of a premium credit. So we do check out alternate SIRs from time to time.
And the second question, and it's probably much more complicated, but I just thought in general, you mentioned the bridges when you were talking about excess liability. And I was going to just ask, I don't know, who actually has primary coverage for our bridges, or is it based on who actually owns the physical structure? Is that?
RTA owns, and I'm not the person to answer it. I'm sure Mr. Shipper could tell you how many bridges RTA owns. Quite a few. I was shocked to find out when I got here. And
Bridges?
yeah,
Well, we have over 100 bridges on the system, and there's a whole combination of ownership, maintenance, and replacement responsibilities. But there's probably, I think there's 81 that are our primary responsibility on the system. Most of those being railroad bridges, but we do have some that are roadway bridges over the tracks that we inherited both from the Shaker system and from the terminal tower. So like Abbey Road is one of ours on the west side, and like East 116th is, or East, 116 and East 105. There's a few of them like that on the east side that are also roadway bridges.
Okay. So we pick that up under the excess liability?
for liability coverage, yes. So
Okay.
should a piece of concrete fall from one, should it, God forbid, collapse,
Right.
we would have liability coverage for the injuries and damages.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Any questions from the CEO, General Manager? Are we good?
No questions, but this is definitely a great result. I know definitely that Judy's been working with Barbara as well as staff to make sure that we can negotiate in the best terms that we can. And so it's nice to be able to see this kind of result. I don't hear this very often across the board on a national scale. Usually there's a little bit more wrestling, I think, that goes into play, especially when you talk about liability and just the safety record, quite honestly, of a lot of our infrastructure, as well as how we kind of control asset. So we've got a little bit more work to do, I think, as most people do, to make sure that everything's tied up and we can continue. But this is probably one of the most favorable I've seen. And in talking with other general managers across the nation, usually this doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, and I just echo what Mayor Weiss said. I know when we met and we reviewed the initial slide deck, just a thank you to you and your team, and highlighting the safety record and what we do at RTA to keep everyone safe. And I think that's sort of reflected here in what we're seeing on the slides.
Thank you very much, and I will give a shout out to Dr. Caver over there because he actually does lead the presentations to the groups of underwriters that we give to all the people on this account and other underwriters that are considering writing this account. So thank you for your help because they really get a good picture of RTA and its operations and how much we care about what we do from those presentations. Although you generated about 100 questions that I had to answer, so thank you very much.
Quick question, Judy, if I may. That's true, I've seen that. The way that we compare maybe to the international markets as well, I know London and Bermuda, and there's some underwriting staff that's across the pond.
Yeah.
Just do you get any commentary, and if Barbara's on the line, just how we compare with other agencies in the industry?
I think I just heard Barb say that she hasn't had a client that's had this good of a renewal across the board so far this year, but Barb, I'll let you comment how this account's results stack up.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that, as I stated, just the comprehensiveness of your specifications and the communication, the underwriters, they do really appreciate that. And I know how painful the questions came at kind of last minute, and so many of them, but it just shows how engaged the underwriters are, and it really does, result in these impressive renewals. I'd say that, obviously we handle other accounts here in California, around the country, and I would say that, your 2% is definitely below what we've seen with other clients that are equally impressive, but I think that you really do shine in terms of what you're doing on safety and risk control and risk management. One thing, I know that you all are well aware of how difficult bus liability is. And so you saw a lot of the questions had to do with that mostly compared to rail. So, that does concern underwriters quite a bit. Also, the fact that you've had a very high self-insured retention for a long time at $5 million, which is where most underwriters are looking for at least.
Great. Is there a motion to refer the insurance package to the full board?
So moved. Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next item we have under our agenda is presentation of the second quarter internal audit activities. We have Anthony Garofoli, Executive Director of Internal Audit, presenting along with, I believe, most of his team. Welcome, Tony.
Thank you, Mayor Kumar, and good morning to members of the committee, members of the leadership team, to my great staff here who is going to join me in the presentation, including our intern here working in the Public Transit Development Program. So welcome, everyone. We are going to be presenting the results of our second quarter activities. And on the agenda, we have 3 items. First is a revision to the professional standards for internal auditors. We also have a brief presentation for the Railcar Replacement Program Change Order Authority and Internal Audit Quarterly Report second quarter activities. There are 2 handouts at everyone's table. The first handout is our slide deck, and the second handout is for the Railcar Replacement Program, which I'll get into in a few minutes. I want to start with some changes to the Institute of Internal Auditors professional standards. They are going through a major revision. The Institute is revising these standards, and they'll be called the Global Audit Standards. This is what our office uses as quality assurance, and we conform with those standards in terms of our work, in terms of how we work with management, in terms of how we are held out to the rest of the audit community. They are regrouping the existing standards into 5 domains under the new standard, again, the global auditing standards. Where are they in the process? So this process began in 2021. You can see that little red arrow at the end of 2023. This has been through a revision. It's been through somewhat of a draft release and a chance for everybody to respond. And now we're expecting these standards to be put out by the Institute at 1/1/2004 with an effective date 12 months later. So, my staff and I will be involved in some early adoption of the standards, and we want to make sure that this board and management, understand what these changes are in upcoming presentations. Basically, they'll be grouped into 5 different domains. The purpose of internal audit, and I'll just say that here, our purpose is to provide consulting and assurance services to support management and this board to meet the business objectives. And that's clearly stated in these in the domain. Ethics and professionalism speak for themselves. What we're held to, our own code of conduct. And this is domain 3 is where we want to make sure that the board is aware of these changes for and how that we interact with our board of trustees, the governing board. And it's my responsibility in those standards to make sure that the board has has that information. Domain 5 is how I'm to manage the internal audit department. And then domain 5 is how our staff will perform those in practice. Just briefly on the governing of IA, that domain 3, so it is divided into 3 principles with 9 standards. Is the internal audit department authorized by the board? Is it positioned independently? And is it overseen by the board? These are not new terms. In fact, our audit charter and the way we've been operating here are going to do very well to conform with the revised standards. And then finally, the last slide here is, as I said, the effective date is 12 months after the release at 1/1. And there'll be some changes that are necessary to our internal audit charter. I'll bring those back to the board. That has to be done by resolution. We have an internal audit manual, so obviously some changes there, to our quality assurance program. And then we are going to, as we have in the past, embed these revised standards into our audit management system, into our daily practice.
Can I just offer one comment, Tony, for Mr. Sleesman? As part of this, we do an external assessment probably every 4 or 5 years. Those individuals had some comments for us that are really board-related comments on the charter. And so what we've decided to do, knowing these international standards were changing at the same time, just to sort of hold all those together, we've met with Raj Gotham, Tony, and I to walk through some of that already. But what we're going to try and do is wait for these standards to come out and then come back to the board with discussion and any potential changes. So just sort of pick it all up at once. None of the items mentioned in the external assessment were game breakers, more of a policy procedure type of decision that we need board input on.
Thank you, Mayor Kumar. Was there any other questions before I move on to the next segment of the presentation? Okay. Please refer to that second handout at your table, and that's the handout that has the new Siemens light rail vehicle in the left-hand box. Okay. And I'll start with that internal audit has been invited and is part of the Railcar Steering Committee. And that basically was involved in a review of the pre-award activities for bringing in the vendor, recruitment, and procurement activities. And now internal audit is moving into the award phase or post-award phase as we're going to be starting to audit this contract. Some discussions that we've had in-house are based upon our experience with some major projects that we had in the past, including the Euclid Corridor and some other major projects, with regards to the inevitable change orders and how those change orders could impact the timing of delivery and the costs of delivery of these new rail cars. So we wanted to introduce this topic of change order authority to the audit committee, and then I will turn it over to Michael Schipper, who's going to make a proposal to the Audit Committee. No action today, just for your information. So let me begin with a profile of the contract that's in place with Siemens. Again, that contract scope includes engineering, manufacturing, testing, delivery, and commissioning of these light rail vehicles, training manuals, training for our staff, spare parts, and special tools that will be needed. This contract amount was approved for just under $164 million. The notice to proceed was issued in late June, and there are contract options for additional 36 light rail vehicles, and all to be determined and discussed with the board. Let me familiarize you with recall the board policy with regards to change orders. This is in our codified rules, the board's codified rules, and the board hereby delegates to the general manager, chief executive officer of the authority, the following responsibilities. And I'm moving to where the contract scale is approved change orders on contracts in the net amount not to exceed $500,000 for contracts over $5 million. Okay, so 10%, the general manager has up to $500,000 in change order authority. Those same rules also say the board may, by resolution, vary these levels to particular contracts or projects. So the question is, should the board consider varying these limits for the rail car replacement contractor? So I had some discussion with several members of management, and also I contacted Calvary Transit. Calvary Transit purchased 260 rail cars over the last 20 years from the same vendor. What was their experience with change orders with this vendor, or just generally within the industry? Also, the authority's management has a consultant on board, Hatch. Hatch has significant experience internationally with rail cars, and I certainly question them on common reasons for change orders. Some of these are not unique, some of them are unique. Certainly regulatory changes, the feds, the safety change, some type of change should come out, which would cause a change order. Design changes, omissions, and alterations reviewed. Design review is going to occur. Certainly unforeseen conditions during final assembly, delivery of the vehicle, once it arrives here, and commissioning of that vehicle, and such as quality issues and scheduling that could not be planned for. Certainly during COVID and a little bit post-COVID, material shortages, late deliveries to the final assembly plant in Sacramento, changes to budgets and schedule. And then finally, changes in technology or specifications by the owner. The RTA is the owner. A change in some kind of a new technology, we must have that on our new rail cars. We simply want to change the color. Any reason for an owner change for a change order. To mitigate the risk of change orders, management has many controls in place. The first is there is a segregation of duties. Project management and the procurement department, two different departments, two different divisions, must work together to work with the contractor and management before a change order can be brought forth to management and then to the board. There are procurement policies and procedures that clearly spell out regulations for change orders. And those are in your package. Okay, so if you look at the last 3 pages of the handout, Melinda D'Angelo, the Director of Procurement, she was very clear in how she described in this memo what that change order process is. Okay, she has a workflow chart, okay, and she references those standards as written in the codified rules and regulations. You'll also see in this handout on page 2 is a procurement file contract administrator's audit checklist. Melinda's team uses this checklist to ensure that they comply with those regulations, that are in the codified rules and regulations. And then finally, for any change order over $50,000, there was and is in place the change order review committee made up of cross-functional people in the organization: grants management, internal audit, legal affairs, the Office of Business Development, the Office of Management and Budget. The procurement contract administrator will lead that discussion, and then the project office will have a representative there to answer any questions. As it's stated in the regulations, the purpose of the change order committee is to ensure strict compliance with the procurement policies and applicable regulations prior to negotiation with the contractor. So these controls are in place to mitigate the change order risks. Over and above that, internal audit is ready to implement and provide special audit procedures. We will be reviewing quotes and invoices, all the change order documents. When necessary, we'll do site visits to observe and verify at the Sacramento headquarters and final assembly plant, and any other vendors or subcontractors that may be involved in the project. Certainly compliance with a contract compliance review, that contract's out in front of us. The FTA, the Federal Transit Administration, they will assign a project management oversight consultant. So management will have to work with that consultant. We will work with that consultant, okay? We will also consult with any appropriate stakeholder and resources necessary to do our work. And then finally, we will be issuing periodic reports to management, to the audit committee, and to the board as necessary as we move along and audit these change orders and just the contract in general. So let me answer any questions that someone might have, and then when those questions end, or if you have none, Michael Schipper is going to take over and make a proposal to management. Are there any questions? Okay. With that, Michael Schipper, our Deputy General Manager of Engineering and Project Management.
Is there another slide for that? Ah, there we go. Thanks, Tony. What we've done is we've had some pretty good internal discussion within the project team and also the deputy general managers and the general manager on what is appropriate. As it currently states, this is a $164 million contract right now, the change order authority would be $500,000. So that's like 1/3%, which, hey, if we were to stay under that, that'd be fabulous. But I think from a practical matter, we know that our experience with other major projects, particularly the ones that we have in construction, having gone through the Euclid Corridor project, Euclid Corridor was the whole program was $200 million, but the largest construction projects in that program were in the $20 million range, and we had 3 of them. And we still maintained the board authority at $500,000, but after 3 years of construction and a pretty good change order record, there was a lot of fatigue within the board when we kept coming back for change order authority for a $20 million contract where we only were at like 1.2 million. We'd already had to come back a couple times for authority, and then we did that 3 times because we had 3 projects that size. And as board members turned over in those 3 years, it got harder and harder and harder to explain our whole change order process. So we know from past experience we've done it, but it kind of hamstringed us from a project team when those are really, really successful projects with very low change orders, but coming back to the board and scheduling things to make sure it got done on the monthly committee review plus board review, and trying not to delay the project. So as Tony mentioned, we've talked to our consultant, we've talked to other owners. change orders are going to happen. We know that. But from a management team, we're going to recommend an increase from the $500,000 limit to $6.5 million. Now, $6.5 million is about 4% of the contract. Our thinking in there is that if we were to deliver this project under that, it'd be a pretty successful project. And hopefully we'd never have to come to the board for change order authority. But even if we were to come to the board for change order authority one time and complete the project in, within 5 or 6% of the total, it's still a very successful project, but only having come to the board to reestablish authority. One thing by moving it to a number like that is we could come to the board when we've expended $5 million of authority with things that we know that's coming so that we don't hamper the schedule. The last thing we want to do is bureaucratically hamper the schedule and cause the cars to be even further delayed. Because we do want these cars running 4 years from now. So it's a big jump, but in terms of percentages, it's a 4% of the contract. It gives us a lot of flexibility in managing. We are not recommending any changes to the administrative procedures and oversight that we have internally. So we're going to keep the change order committee active at the $50,000 range. We expect that they'll be pretty active because with a base order of 24 cars, a couple $1,000 change on a car is $50,000. So, we've talked about it a lot. We do want to get this in place as we, begin, and we have begun, quite a bit of design review, spec review, preliminary engineering with the consultant or the contractor already. But we don't want to get into a spot where we have a $600,000 change order and we have to delay a month to go through the board approval process when we need to have some flexibility in working with the vendor so that we can keep the project on schedule. So that's what we're looking at.
Just talk a little bit more about the number itself of $6.5 million, that the internal discussions you had, higher or lower, of how that came in, sort of factoring in discussions with other transit authorities, things like that.
Well, the high-end discussions were probably some of the recommendations we got from the outside that were more in the 8 to 10% range in terms of flexibility. And even $500,000 on a $5 million contract is a 10%. But we run a lot of contracts that are in the $8 to $10 million range that we manage within that $500,000 now. So that's why we were tending more from a management team to be closer to 5%. And in the discussions, the project team themselves recommended the 4%. And they did that, I think, one, they're very optimistic on their ability to manage the contract, but we do know things are going to happen. I think we also felt that because the number being big, we didn't want to get into that 8 and 10% range. I think that would be too big of a jump. And if we are in that range, we'd rather come back to the board and make sure that we're periodically updating you on the progress of the project so that if we ever reach that number, it's not going to be out of the blue. So if we come back with a quarterly report and says, hey, the change orders to date are $2 million, and the next quarter the change orders to date are $3 million, and a year later it's at $4 million, there will be a documentation and communication between us and the board so you know how the project's tracking. So that was some of the thinking that we had in going with the 4% that the design team recommended. We rounded it to 6.5, And the change, like this change order log, this would be something that would be part of our periodic updates to the board, so that as we have change orders, it is communicated. But, so we're trying to balance that out. But we didn't want to go at the higher end. I think if we do have to, at some point, amend the change order authority or reestablish it, you will have had the communication with us, so that, it's not coming out of the blue. Yeah.
So I just wanted to take a moment. This is a really important ask, and I recognize that. So I just wanted to kind of give it that credence. As Mike mentioned, everything he said is totally accurate. We've had several debates, if I can use that word accurately, internally to talk about what threshold would be acceptable and palatable to the board, and really to us, because this is really the first time that we all have done this as a team and individually for most people as well. And this is a once-in-a-generation project, if not once-in-a-career project for the team members. So when we're thinking about a threshold that was recommended, as Mike mentioned, by about 4% all the way up to 10%, we wanted to be able to split the baby in a way that we felt comfortable, that was manageable, and that also had the insight by the audit team to be able to review us at any particular time as we go forward. I would actually encourage and I would suggest that board members request an audit. It can be ad hoc, it can be at any time. And also, we would have programmatical sort of updates on at least a semi-annual basis to be able to kind of give you a status on where we are. My comfort level personally is somewhere in the middle, right, around the 6.5, and I definitely pressed upon the team to be able to think about is 5 versus 7 was my threshold of kind of thinking through that. And thinking about how we do manage a lot of our major capital projects within normally that 8 to 10% threshold range, we have a track record of being able to go through the change order process. Again, that's not being changed. We wanted to make sure that we had every assurance internally to make sure that when we started to approach those kind of red flagger areas, so the 5 million is an example to say, hey, when we're starting to be able to think about upping the limit or coming back to the board, if we're going to actually hit the 6.5%, we need to be able to do our due diligence to first give you advance notice, to understand how many times during the life of the contract we'd be coming to you. Our goal is once. We understand we might be here twice, but in order to avoid coming 3 and 4 times, we wanted to make sure that that threshold was palatable by us. And again, we did not go for anything over 6.5 because I think we're trying to remain conservative so that we also can keep reins on the project. I do appreciate audit. Definitely, we have had that conversation with the group. Tony's been very helpful in making sure that we've kind of maintained the process that we have and even overlapped it with a couple more assurances. So I know that I will be requesting a quarterly update. Tony and I meet on a quarterly basis, and we'll review that on the internal level. But my recommendation would be that we come to the board on a semi-annual basis, if not more, as requested by the chair, of course, and then we can make sure that we give you an update. And of course, that $5 million or less threshold would be our signal to say, hey, we're expecting to be able to come back within the next 6 months or so based on XYZ.
Thank you. And I think, Tony and I, when we were reviewing the presentation, the thing that I had brought up to him is I understand that balance of management and board oversight, coupled with being able to get a contract done, knowing how frequently we meet and going through that process. And so I think trying to find a balance is important. I think the thing I sort of stressed to Tony, and I think he was going to communicate to all of you, is I think from a board perspective, some type of high-level slide in your report or Mike's report of saying, hey, here's where we're in the rail program, original contract price, the new price, the net change orders in a line item, previously maybe the current month or current quarter, here's what's added, cumulative, just a snapshot. I don't think we need a lot of detail, but I think in a project this large, like semi-annual, probably is not comfortable, but at least a snapshot of where you are, just as you don't need a detail, but here's how we're proceeding. I think something of a very high-level slide of just net numbers, net changes, and what's happened since the last time someone presented, whether that's engineering or whether that's the CEO, is sort of, I was throwing out that concept because I'm just trying to think of what questions we may receive from other board members, and I think sort of a high-level snapshot without getting into detail of these changes, because to your point, you most likely will have some.
And if I can, before Tony pops in for a second, absolutely. And I know to have the quarterly report out would be probably ideal. And we talked about embedding it in a report format for audit so that you do get that kind of high level. And then the more detailed can perhaps be the semi-annual if necessary. And that could be something that we could delve into at like a retreat or something like that if you need to get into the nitty gritty of it. But I think that making it part of the audit committee report out makes a lot of sense because it has that additional oversight included. So, Tony.
Yeah, and I also think, given that, well, this is a very dynamic group, we're not maybe as well attended by the public and others. We'll work on that. So I think some reference at the regular board meetings for the fact that all board members would be there, I also think is important. I think both is fine, but I would think from a public-facing perspective, we would want to have those updates at the regular board meeting as well.
Thank you, Ms. Terry. And Mayor Kumar, page 3 of the handout includes the standard change order log from Melinda's procurement program. And the contract administrator, Mabry Harris, will be updating this log, for every event. And, you can expect that this will be something in the forefront to provide that snapshot to you.
And I think that's great. You have it there, and we have an internal audit, and you can just sort of see as it moves along, knowing that if we're moving towards, let's hope we don't have more change orders than we expect. But again, no one, when I'm presenting to our city council, nobody likes surprises. So if you're doing more frequent updates of just at a high level, not, having this maybe as backup, but having just some totals, that gives me a sense, a global sense, because I think that checks the box of board oversight without delving into being part of management and operations.
I had a couple quick questions. First, I'm encouraged to hear that there was debate. Hopefully it wasn't too contentious or too rocky, but I think that's the kind of thing that's very welcome from an oversight standpoint, and from just actually, like, my 2 cents on management is to get those kinds of things as long as they don't hold things up too much. To that extent, and I don't need to hear details, and I don't need to hear necessarily who personally had what opinions, but I'd love to hear more about what happened during those debates, of what pros and cons of various points of view, or what numbers to pick out.
Yeah, I can address that. Again, we had, I think, really the debate, we had some outside input, that was in the higher ranges, the 8 to 10% ranges. I think internally, I think a lot of us, for our major projects in my division, we have a goal of being under 5% change orders. That's our goal, and so 5%, would have been $8 million. I think there's a lot of us on the team that felt, the jump from 500,000 to 8 was too much. I think there's a lot of people that felt that we should be under 5%, and that's when we went back to the design team to see what they were comfortable with. They came back with the 4% recommendation. We brought that back to our table at another meeting. I think we had, again, thoughts of, as the general manager said, something between 5 million and 7 million. And, we felt that going with the design team's recommendation at 6.5, being about 4% of the contract, was appropriate. The team that's working on this, even though Flance and I are kind of the champions, You know, the project manager and his team have to deliver the project. So I think the feeling was that if that was their recommendation, it was certainly much less than the 8 and 10% that the, you know, the DGM group and CEO felt, well, that's kind of in the range we're thinking about. You know, let's let them work towards their recommendation and manage the project within that realm, if, you know, if it's okay with the board. Obviously, you know, the 500,000 is really going to be, you know, difficult to, well, one, it's just going to be difficult in terms of the project management. So I think we all know we need to do something. And if the board wants to do something less than the 6.5 million, that's fine. We would hope that the board would be agreeable to do something that is greater than the 500,000 that we have right now. I will say that in the 20-some years I've been here, we've never asked the board to raise a change order authority for a specific project, even though we've had it in the manual, and even though we have managed some 20 million plus contracts. But we did realize in managing those $20 million plus contracts that we probably should have, in hindsight, made some recommendation on those projects to have a little bit more flexibility. So we don't want to repeat that mistake. But we want to do whatever the board's comfortable with, and we will work within whatever range or number or figure that's agreed to.
And then, I don't know if anyone knows offhand, does anyone know how long that 500,000 figure has been the figure?
I know it predates me, so I don't know if Melinda's got more history.
It's been part of the procurement manual since at least 1997, which references the code book. So, and I agree with Mike. Just so you know, Mr. Sleesman, I was part of the process also. Procurement would be in the forefront, but I did want to also reiterate that in my 26 years here, that this is the one and only time we've ever come before our board, but also this is by far the largest procurement that I've ever been a part of in all the years I've been here, and I think that this is necessary. I am one of the ones that was on the conservative side. We did have some other recommendations for the 8 to 10%, which would have put up to a $16 million change order, which I personally would be comfortable with. So there was a lot of debate between the about 8%, we were talking about 8 million, 5%. And as a group, we came to the 6.5 million, if that helps.
If I can piggyback just for a moment, I definitely agree with what Melinda and Mike have said. Having worked on smaller procurements for rail, for rehab cars, usually between the 10 and 12% is where I found a lot of agencies that are getting, well, new for them cars, if you want to call it that, gently used or not. And even pre-COVID, there were significant issues that can be found during the shakedown process and the delivery process that led to the acceptance that we're talking about as well. And so there's a lot of factors when you think about the international market. There's only a handful of manufacturers that are making these cars as well. So we're kind of, subject to their demand schedules and what they have time for. And I have found that in the best laid plans, you always have that slight margin of error. So I would be amazed if we don't hit that 6.5 or at least close over the next few years to be able to get to those 24 or more cars. I would not think that we have very many comparables. We did talk about how other contracts are, Tony mentioned Calgary, but being able to think about every contract is wildly different as well. And then also thinking about where we are in the pecking order from a national standpoint as well. And for example, if Cleveland is ahead of X city, and where you get into those rush kind of conversations versus pull back. Usually that's when the change orders for the rail typically come into play, when you're kind of clawing to be able to meet your deadlines and delivery. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there as well.
And Mike, I might, Mayor Weiss and I were talking about this topic prior to the meeting. This is a change order thing, and I know he got pulled away for a second. So I would like to just circle back briefly to try and get him updated on the conversation. A couple things, Mayor, that we had discussed is that the 500,000 change order figure, Mr. Sleesman asked, that's been in effect since 1997. Was that right? Or prior or later? It's been fixed. There was a lot of discussion internally of that related to 10%. That would be 16 million. That was probably too high. 5%, I think, is 8 million, if I'm doing my math correct. I think Melinda from procurement was saying that, you know, she was more on the conservative side as they had those internal discussions on what this might look like. I had entered into some discussion with management of find a balance of some more frequent reporting at a high level of original contract price, net, you know, change order amount, net change in the contract price. So we sort of had sort of a little high-level executive metric that we could pull into, potentially pulling that into the general manager CEO's report, including it in the quarterly internal audit meetings, looking at that, and just walking through some of that. Is there anything else, Mike, you want to cover at a high level? Because I just, in case Mayor Weiss has some questions, I just wanted to incorporate it at this point in time.
No, I think the intention is that we would come back to another committee meeting where more members of the boards are present, whichever committee is appropriate, and then if it's okay with that committee, then we would actually come forward with a resolution. And I think, you know, we're looking at trying to do this in the September cycle. So that's our thought process. This is kind of an introduction of that, and we would carry that on at the next committee meetings in September, and if appropriate, the board meeting for a resolution in September.
This is the standard form that you have in your packet that they use for tracking change orders. And then there's also in there a checklist, I think on page 2, that is used. And from a procurement perspective, Melinda, I know I've worked on some contracts with you. You're very detailed. You and your team, I think, do a good job. If someone in the room, whether it's Mike or procurement, can talk about when there is a change order, what this process looks like and how you meet and how you go through things, maybe that might be a little historical perspective just on a non-rail car issue that we can get a better sense as the committee of how that functions.
You want me to explain that right now? No problem. A change order is actually we consider a standalone. Technically, it's a sole source because you're modifying a current contract. So we treat it as a sole source addition to a contract, which means we can negotiate. It can be generated by the project office. It can be generated by the vendor. It comes through as a proposed request for a change order. We receive the information, the scope, et cetera, from the project office. They provide an independent cost estimate of what they believe it's going to charge. They have to justify why we need to change order the contract. I did try to itemize fairly well in the memo that's attached the process of what's required of the project office. Once procurement receives all the information from the project office, we put together a formal request to the contractor asking them to provide a pricing proposal. The pricing comes into procurement. We review the pricing. We speak with the project office, and we go into negotiations with the contractor to try and find a fair and reasonable price to add to the change order process. If it's over $50,000, we must go before our change order committee, which was put in effect around the Euclid corridor time to help mitigate additional risk. That change order committee has internal audit, the project office, legal, grants, Office of Business Development, and the contract administrator leads that. They walk through the proposal in extreme detail as to each portion of what the pricing would be, what the scope, to make sure it's not a cardinal change. If the change order committee approves it, then we move forward and try and finalize our negotiations and then make a recommendation to execute the change order, utilizing India and her change order authority, or if it's above her change order authority, then we would bring it back to the board to execute. We then make sure we summarize and document the contract file. We file the tabulations, and we also attach the log, which provides a good history. All that information is also provided to the change order committee during the change order process. Does that help?
Yes, it does, thank you. And I think as part of the discussion, Mike, you had mentioned that for this project, well, that the proposed request by management to increase to $6.5 million would be in effect. The $50,000 would still be in effect for the change order committee.
My change
so
order
that
committee,
threshold of the $50,000 would not be increased.
That's
and
correct.
Internal audit and all those things that you just mentioned for anything 50 and above would still be active.
That's correct. What I did not attach in this packet is the actual change order section of the procurement manual. I know you each were given a manual, my Bible, when you started here, but there is a section on change orders that's quite lengthy, and it's a lot more detail than what I've provided in the little packet. This is just more or less a little summary to give you an idea, to try and give you a comfort level that we, dot our I's and cross our T's and document, and of course, subject to all audits at all times. So actually, the FTA and the triennial that we just had audited several of our contracts in construction, and they pulled some of our very large change orders, which we knew they would, and they were very, very pleased with our documentation in the file, and they even told us that in our interviews, so that they liked our tabulations, which is unique to our organization.
Just for clarification, so is there a proposal? Okay.
Oh,
No.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Mayor Weiss, well, we don't have it written on the slide, but our management team proposal would be that for this project, for the railcar project specifically, that change order authority be increased to $6.5 million, which is about 4% of the contract value. That's our proposal, as opposed to our current, which is $500,000, which is about 1/3% of the contract value, because this is a $164 million contract. So that's our proposal. Again, we had debates of ranges that probably from 5 million up to 16. Our team has decided to bring forth the proposal at 6.5 million for this particular project at about 4%. The other thing in change orders, when we do change management, we also address not only cost but schedule, and we address those at the same time. So, so sometimes we will have a change order that is only specific to the schedule. Sometimes those are at no cost. Sometimes they are at a cost, maybe especially for accelerating the schedule. Sometimes when we have a change order to actually do the change, there's a cost and a time implementation or impact, and we don't allow our vendors to take 2 bites at the apple. So if there's a change order for an unforeseen site condition that's going to cost us $50,000, they cannot come back later and say, oh, that also delayed us a month. We deal with it as one item. So cost and time, and sometimes it's cost only, sometimes it's time only, sometimes it's both. But we do that through our change process.
So is the 6.5 an aggregate of all change orders, or is that a?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be an aggregate. We would, again, using the change order log in our periodic reports, part of any reporting we make to the board would be in terms of contract status. What we're recommending is we would report, hey, here's our contract. As of July 31st, we've executed 5 change orders with a total of this. We have other pending change orders we're negotiating. We come back 3 months or 6 months or whatever the cycle is on reporting the change order or reporting on the rail car contract. that would be part of any report so that you know how it's going. So by the time, if we ever get to that point, I mean, if we do get to that point where we need to request a reinstatement of change order authority, the board has been briefed frequently enough to know what we've been doing so that it's not a out of the blue, we're hitting you out of the blue going, hey, we need to increase it because we're at $6.4 million today.
That's where I think in some of the reporting we have at the board meeting, a snapshot of where they are, not to find out when we're at 6.4.
Right.
It's trouble. Hopefully that never happens.
Yeah.
But again, just having a snapshot of where we were at the last report, to your point, Mike, updates in the last 2 months or 3 months or whatever we would decide. I know the management had thrown out 6 months. I thought that was maybe a little long. I know within those time periods there might be report outs that might not have any activity depending on where you are in that process. So I think that's what we were trying to get our sense around of, just so the board was informed of that process and how, where we were in it and how it was going, just to get those high-level summaries without maybe a ton of the detail. Obviously, you have internal audits involved, and they're looking at that, and anything over 50,000, we're going to get that update through our quarterly internal audit meetings and get feedback from Tony and his team on that. So, people that want to maybe do a deeper dive are more than welcome to come here so that we're well attended. And
Yeah.
that's what we sort of.
We will include it in our quarterly report to the full board. Tony and I I think we share one meeting every quarter anyway, and so we'll just include it as customary in that report every 3 months. Yeah.
Well, I shouldn't, not a question, just a comment. If that 500,000 number is at least 26, I mean, there's people in the room probably who weren't born the last time it was edited. We may want to revisit that, making sure it's appropriate, but we may want to come up with a, more updated number of that, which not for this project, like just in general.
Makes sense.
We did look at it a few years ago. We did have a discussion, and we left it as is. We still deemed it to be appropriate, and bring anything over 500,000 to the board for a renewal. We can look at it again, but we did review it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe again, just we've had a couple of years of high inflation, even though it's coming down. We'll see where it's at.
Yeah, it's good to know that you had looked at it not too long ago so that it still made sense.
If there's no other questions, I'll move on to the final section of our committee meeting. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our acting audit manager, Stephen Zimmerman. Stephen is going to take the lead here and introduce this agenda, and then we'll have each of our staff auditors stop up and present their own work.
Sure. Good morning, Audit Chair Kumar, members of the Audit Committee, General Manager and CEO India Bursong Terry, and members of management. My name is Stephen Zimmerman, and I'm the Acting Audit Manager. Today, we are pleased to present to you the results of the second quarter internal audit activities. The remaining slides that we have for this presentation will mirror the content that will be included in the forthcoming written audit report, and we also use that format as we present, where we'll be talking about things such as our completed projects, our continuous auditing program, projects in progress, special requests and emerging issues, our external audit coordination issues, status of outstanding follow-up, other projects and staff training. Also, for those who may be new to our audit committee presentations, I'll direct you to the bottom of the slide where we include call-out boxes that reference standards that a particular slide might be addressing. In this case, this quarterly presentation is satisfying the requirement that the internal audit function report periodically to management and the board on our activities. I will also introduce what our example template looks like as we go through our completed and projects in progress. For every slide, we'll share what the audit title is, the objective of the audit, the scope, which would be the audit fieldwork or program that we executed, the results, which we use 4 different categories for our results, ranging from satisfactory to unsatisfactory, although we might have a few deviations this quarter due to some external coordination that doesn't fall within those bounds. And then if there are issues for board consideration, we'll bring them to the board. Most issues, I will say, are management level, but if they are very high risk or have very high impact from time to time, we do bring issues to the board. For our first completed project, we'll be discussing the financial audit support that the Internal Audit Department completed in support of the State of Ohio Auditor's Office 2022 single audit. Our objective was to maximize risk coverage and minimize duplication of efforts by working in tandem with the State Auditor's Office. The scope included various areas where we were able to assist the state auditor, including revenue collection, where we execute our fair collection script, analysis, and results summary. Our parts inventory in 2022, we completed an audit of the cycle count program that supports our parts inventory. The financial disclosure analysis, which is a state of Ohio ethics law requirement that the state auditor asked us to complete. Grants management, where we evaluate grants drawdowns for appropriateness. Contract compliance, which includes the various contract audits that we completed in the prior years, as well as a fraud risk assessment that relates to fraud risk for the financial statements. The results are that the State Auditor of Ohio was able to rely on the work of internal audit when they completed their 2022 single audit. The auditor report was released July 18th of this year. There was one management letter deficiency. As part of our external coordination, we coordinate the tracking of recommendation of follow-up of those deficiencies in our audit management system. We have no issues for board's consideration. Another external audit coordination is our Federal Transit Administration Triennial Review, where the FTA came in, and our objective was to support management during that triennial review. The FTA reviewed 18 program areas where we participated in those program reviews, and we were able to provide analyses, summaries, documentation, past audit results, and institutional knowledge to support management in their response to the FTA, as well as a few instances where the FTA actually asked for some of our audits to satisfy their compliance requirements, particularly as it relates to our contracted paratransit services. The results are that management and the FTA were able to rely on the work of our department. There were 3 deficiencies noted, which I'll say for an FTA triennial is a very low number, so kudos to management on that. And as with the state auditor audit, we are tracking the corrective action plans in our audit management system, and that report was released on August 7th of this year. And there were no issues for board consideration. I will now turn it over to Molly O'Donnell, who will talk about her completed projects for this quarter.
Good morning, Chairperson Kumar, members of the Audit Committee, and General Manager Birdsong Terry. The authority is required to conduct pre-award and post-delivery Buy America audits for the purchases of rolling stock as a term of our federal grants. We presented on this in detail last audit committee, but Stephen Zimmerman and I traveled to Siemens facility in Sacramento to conduct the pre-award Buy America audit for our purchase of replacement rail cars. Our results were satisfactory. We found that the vendor complied with federal regulations and there were no issues for board consideration. We issued the report for this audit this prior quarter. The second completed project I had was our overtime project. Our objective was to analyze overtime across the authority and explore any patterns or red flags for follow-up. We also intended this project to benchmark overtime for both internal audit, future use, and management use. Our scope included overtime expenses for a variety of overtime eligible employees, such as operators, mechanics, janitors, et cetera, in the time period 2019 to 2022. We also looked at work order records from our maintenance management system and operator time and attendance system records. We shared the results of our analysis and the internal control risks that we found with management, and there were no issues for board consideration. I'll turn it over to Laura Crawshaw to discuss her completed projects.
Good morning, Chairperson Kumar, members of the Audit Committee, and CEO General Manager Birdsong Terry. My completed project in the second quarter was an audit of our Fair Media ticket stock contract. The objective was to review the vendor contract, identify compliance obligations and risks to management objectives, and document controls and evaluate compliance with the contract. Our scope was pre-printed ticket stock inventory, blank ticket stock inventory, fare card testing, fair media destruction, and contract invoicing. Our results were satisfactory with findings and recommendations for management. We recommended enhancing the process of ordering blank stock to minimize duplication of efforts, which management implemented, and broke down silos between internal stakeholders. We had no issues for board consideration. And I will hand it over to Darren Garlock to talk about his completed projects.
Audit Chair Kumar, members of the Audit Committee, General Manager, CEO Birdsong Terry, and welcome guests. Good morning. We finished up an audit of the Public Transportation Agency safety plans, accident notification, and investigation procedures. Our objective was to ensure compliance with FTA, NTSB, and SSO requirements for accident notification. The scope included compliance with FTA standards and GCRTA's SOPs, accident reporting, response, and investigations. Results were marginally satisfactory with findings of a paper-heavy process, and management is looking to digitize and automate the process based on our recommendations. Per board policy, internal audit performs a compliance review on all trip reports and travel expense reimbursements. 100% of second quarter trips were reviewed, where a significant increase in travel was observed. Results have been satisfactory with findings and recommendations for management. And now I'm going to transition to projects that are currently in progress. At the request of GM CEO Birdsong Terry, internal audit has begun evaluating the survey inputs for traction performance measurement. Our objective is to validate that survey design and methodology are reliable and that results are accurately captured and reported. Our scope includes the customer experience, community value, and workplace experience surveys from 2022. Now in the fieldwork phase, an entrance conference was held with the members of the executive management team for buy-in on the scope of our fieldwork. We are currently in the testing phase of an employee independent healthcare eligibility audit. Our objective is to evaluate compliance with our healthcare coverage policies and procedures. The scope includes enrollment records and supporting information from January of 2021 through March of 2023. We recently expanded our audit to include 100% of those employees enrolled in the medical plan. And as of August 1st, there are approximately 1,510 dependent lives enrolled in our medical plan. Once complete, internal audit will provide a list to human resources of those employees who need to provide the necessary documentation to support dependent enrollment, such as a birth certificate or a marriage license. This audit will serve as a predecessor to the healthcare claims consultant audit that Tony will touch on later in our presentation. The Common Area Maintenance Agreement is the agreement between GCRTA and Bedrock Real Estate, which allows our customers to use the common areas of Tower City to access the Gateway Accessway and the Rapid Station. The objective was to identify the requirements of the agreement and to validate compliance with those terms. The scope included a payment history review, invoice accuracy, utility billing, and reimbursable expenses. Internal audit is working with the GCRTA property manager to evaluate expenses paid and to schedule a meeting with Bedrock. And now I'd like to reintroduce Laura Crawshaw, who's going to discuss her projects in progress.
My first progress project I will discuss is an audit of asset and configuration management. This audit is a collaboration with the Safety Department on the agency's Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan. Since the last time we presented on this project, there are some updates. The Asset and Configuration Management Department is transitioning from an independent department in operations to one under Fleet Management, and the manager of this department is vacant, but management plans to fill the position soon. Our objective with this audit is to evaluate RTA compliance with FTA and SSO requirements for configuration management and to provide assurance on the configuration management plan, governance, and execution. Our scope is PTAS compliance with FTA standards, management or maintenance requirements, state of good repair assets, asset inventory completeness, and technical capacity. And the current status is testing and field work. My next project in progress is an audit of the customer communications process for service interruptions. Our objective is to evaluate GCRTA processes for responding to and communicating planned and unplanned service interruptions to customers. Our scope is case studies of planned and unplanned service interruptions, documenting GCRTA customer communications. We will be taking advantage of the upcoming blue-green line shutdown starting August 20th to evaluate management controls for customer communications. We are in the planning and risk assessment field. And the last project in progress I will discuss is a physical inventory of parts. Physical inventory and valuation of parts was completed in April for the Central Bus Maintenance Facility, our largest parts warehouse. And the count and valuation were reasonable compared to our financial management system records. A physical inventory is planned at the Rail District, our second largest warehouse. We are in testing fieldwork phase and will continue with the audit when the physical inventory is planned at Rail. And I'll hand it back over to Molly O'Donnell to talk about her projects in progress.
The first project in progress that I have is the engineering project controls and project support project. Internal audit had a risk-based template of test procedures for evaluating construction projects that was written a number of years ago. So our objective for this project was to identify the current controls in place for project management within the engineering division and to develop an updated template of test procedures that internal audit will use to evaluate future construction project audits. In addition to developing the template of test procedures, we sought to apply this to a sample project for use in internal training. So the sample project that we are applying our updated template of test procedures to is the East 79th Street Red Line reconstruction that was completed several years ago. This project is currently in the testing and fieldwork stage. In a continuation of internal audit's work on overtime, the second project in progress that I have is transit police overtime and comp time. Our objective is to evaluate management controls for authorizing, recording, processing, and paying overtime and compensatory time, and provide assurance on the completeness, cutoff, and accuracy of transit police overtime and compensatory time. This is a standalone audit because compensatory time is accrual that's unique to transit police, but we sought to do it as a continuation of our other overtime work. The time period that we are looking at is transit police overtime earned from May 2021 to May 2023, and this project is currently wrapping up risk assessment and moving to the testing and fieldwork phase. Finally, I had the employee hiring practices project. This was a consulting engagement to document and understand the current hiring process and evaluate any bottlenecks in the process. This project is currently in the reporting phase, but internal audit has undertaken additional value-added work like flowcharts and data analysis to support human resources implementation of their new applicant tracking software. I'll turn it over to our intern, Madeline Harwood, to discuss the project that she worked on.
Good morning, Audit Chair Kumar, members of the Audit Committee, and General Manager, CEO, Birdsong Terry. As Molly just said, my name is Madeline Harwood, and I've been fortunate enough to intern with our internal audit department this summer. And I'm going to be presenting on the project I completed regarding our paratransit supplemental services. The objective of this audit was just to provide assurance of contract compliance amongst each of our contracted paratransit services, which include Provider Ride, GC Logistics, and Senior Transportation Connection. The scope of this audit was this current contract period, which began on June 1st of this year, and the items we tested for included vehicle maintenance and age, operator payroll, fare collection practices, onboard vehicle camera systems, and the drug and alcohol program of each contractor. For the field work of this audit, we completed secret shopper trips on board vehicles from each of the 3 contractors. And additionally, we did a site tour at each of the contractor facilities. Currently, we are summarizing our results to share with management, and after that, we should be ready to issue a final report regarding this audit. I will now hand it back to Steven Zimmerman to talk more on some of our other projects.
Thank you, Maddie. All right, so the Internal Audit Department continues to monitor the heavy rail motor overhaul project. We originally undertook this audit because we were seeking to evaluate the evolving smoky motor issue, although it has become apparent that the overhaul of those heavy rail traction motors back to their OEM specifications has mitigated the smoky motors. Our scope includes contract compliance with the Swagger motor overhaul contract, the GCRTA quality assurance internal review process, as well as evaluation of the engineering services task order. We continue to monitor this project. Currently, management is in receipt of approximately 75% of their heavy rail traction motors, and we'll carry this project until 100% of motors have been returned. As Molly talked about earlier, we completed the pre-award audit for the railcar replacement, but obviously we will continue to carry the overall railcar vehicle replacement program audit over the next few years, with our objective being to provide ongoing contract compliance assurance, as well as procurement activities, evaluations, things such as change orders, funding, invoicing requirements, as well as any future Buy America audits that might be required, which could include additional pre-award activities, especially if we exercise options where suppliers may have changed, and of course, the inevitable post-delivery that will be coming in the next few years. Our scope will be basically through the entire contract period, and of course, our update is that notice to proceed was issued June in this year, and we are currently in the manufactured phase. We also have a number of coach procurements that will be entering the post-delivery phase. So we are purchasing 20 paratransit coaches in the third quarter of 2023, where we will complete the necessary post-delivery reviews, which includes Buy America compliance, the purchaser's review, and the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards review. In addition to those 20 paratransit coaches, we also have 20 CNG coaches. This is the third option for this particular contract, also anticipated to be delivered in the third quarter, also subject to the same post-delivery review, which includes Buy America compliance, purchaser's review, and the FMVSS review. I will now turn it over to Andrew Scott, where he will talk about the IT projects that are in progress.
Good morning, Audit Chair Kumar, members of the Audit Committee, GM Birdsong Terry. We continue our work on the accrued time reconciliation project. We're currently working towards scheduling an entrance conference with management. Prior to that, we need to work on the test development to share with them, and we're really trying to work on what appropriate tests are there to cover the risks that we have identified, as well as not overwhelming their staff of HRIS and the benefits departments. Moving forward, we are starting a system access management audit. The purpose of this audit will be to evaluate the controls in place for accessing the various critical systems which the authority owns and utilizes. The scope of the project will entail governance, identity management, system authentication, authorization, access control, and monitoring of the systems. Currently, we're in the stages of planning the risk assessment phase and developing a schedule that we will use moving into the future to regularly audit the access to the systems. So more critical systems we will work on an annual basis, where some other smaller systems will be on a rotating schedule for either an annual, biannual, triannual audit review. Other projects that we monitor ongoing IT implementations, the Consolidated Train Dispatch System project has officially been kicked off. There are regular meetings with the vendor to discuss the requirements. The current phase of that project is that the vendor is working on the conceptual plan, which is the initial conceptual plan, which is due at the end of September, with the finalized plan due by the end of the year. Our Transit Master system upgrade, the ITS department is currently working with the vendor Vantis to move this system into the cloud to give more disaster recovery capabilities, as well as a full system upgrade to provide more capabilities in that system. Both our Oracle and Ultramain projects, which were initially planned to be completed between the months of May and June, have each been pushed back due to some integration issues between the systems. Currently, they're both on track to be completed by the end of the month, I believe. No one else is in the room to answer that question. But the testing of the interfaces and connecting of the systems together are being tested actively and are currently on track to be completed. The Easy Fare fare collection mobile payment is still being rolled out. The initial rollout of the system using the mobile app and QR codes for onboard fare validation has been successful. We hear reports on the fare media inventory, the orders going down because of the number of usage, the amount of usage that we get in using the system. The current state of this deployment is that the hardware to be installed on both our rail vehicles and in station at the rail facilities, those are currently in production and scheduled to be completed by the end of the year. Once this is completed, we'll be able to move on to the next, and some would say most important step of the project, which is the account-based ticketing and fare capping that we'll be able to implement. As Molly alluded to earlier, IT is working on an applicant tracking system to enhance the hiring practice. They're also working on learning management to develop new courses and accurately track learning opportunities. Data center co-location project, which is to enable us to either host systems fully at an offsite location or to duplicate our hosting facilities for disaster recovery and backup, as well as the point of sale system. This is an on-hold project until after our Oracle upgrade is completed and they can move on to a more complete dedication to that, as well as various infrastructure updates. Per the internal audit recommendation, the IT council has been formed. This is to replace the longstanding IT steering committee that was disbanded when COVID started. This council meets bi-monthly, and in this meeting, they discuss various governance items, project status updates for approval. And so just some updates from this council is that both the IT and Management Information Services groups are hiring. They're working on completing and filling their staffs, whether that be hiring positions that have been vacant for some time, including our database administrator position, telecom engineers, network engineers, as well as new positions such as trainers, various project support. The council plans on developing and having draft governance documents by the end of the year. Throughout the years, a number of audits have revealed weaknesses in the governance that we have in place in the IT sections. So Mike Lively and his team, as well as Joshua Miranda and his team, are working together to create these core governance documents to help manage the IT departments better. The network infrastructure team and the security engineer have completed an FTA cyber assessment tool to evaluate where we stand in our cyber security capabilities. Using this assessment and what comes out of that, they'll be working with the executive management team as well as other core stakeholders to develop plans for improvement and to fortify our cybersecurity posture. We're looking forward to, in the near future, getting some tabletop exercises for any testing our disaster recovery and backup capabilities, as well as just any other incidents that may arise. Finally, the IT department's developed a 3-year strategic plan with some of these projects including the system implementations and upgrades that I've already mentioned, as well as outfitting the new Brook Park rail shops for network infrastructure, endpoint device replacements, as well as onboard technology replacements. Before I hand it over to Randy, for those that are newer to the board, I wanted to give a brief overview of the continuous auditing program. So continuous auditing is a method which utilizes a series of scripts to perform audit activities and evaluate the controls in place so that we can identify outliers and exceptions, and then we, as well as management teams, can evaluate those risks and identify and correct them. It's a cyclical process, so it starts with the identifying of a process and risk, developing scripts which will investigate those risks, looking at the results from those, working with management to fix those, and then seeing if any other risks have evolved, come up, and then continuously going through that cycle and creating new scripts to address those risks. This program was started in about 2017. We've gone through a couple primary stakeholders responsible for developing and running these scripts. And I can proudly say that over the past few months, Randy, our continuous audit specialist, has been working diligently to update these scripts from what were previously largely manual processes, which could take anywhere between a few days to a couple months to perform, to now any of the scripts, any of the processes that we work on can be run in a matter of minutes to hours. So with that, I will turn this over to Randy Bowles to discuss his continuous audit efforts.
Good morning, Audit Chair Kumar, members of the Audit Committee, actually, she's not here anymore, and guests. Just to kind of piggyback on what Andrew was saying, you know, with continuous audit, I could be analyzing like hundreds of thousands of records or even more in multiple databases. In some cases, you know, I think our biggest one was like 9 different databases. As Andrew said, you know, it could run in seconds or minutes. So I just want to take a kind of like a brief 30-second way of explaining. If it runs in seconds, what am I doing with the rest of my time? And part of that is actually improving these processes because it starts off very manual. So things are done with it just to try to get it more efficient. And by making it more efficient, it gets faster and it allows to do the reporting more frequent because we started off doing it quarterly and we started shrinking it down to monthly, and we're looking in some cases to get it even faster. It allows it to be more accurate as well. So I'll start off with purchasing card. And Tony sent me an email recently, and it was an article where Eastern Gateway Community College president and vice president were indicted for misuse of credit cards. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind as I go through some of the things that we do in continuous auditing for purchase cards. And the main objective is to streamline the purchasing process to allow the procurement of goods in a timely manner. And as I mentioned before, when we first started this process, it was ran quarterly, and now we do it on a monthly basis, and we've been doing it on a monthly basis for some time and reporting it to administration. And we recently hired a new P-card administrator, and one of the things we did is we've reviewed the merchant code flags. Every time you purchase something with a purchasing card, there's a merchant code associated with it, and we sat down with the management and just identified the codes that they wanted to see and they wanted to flag. Doesn't mean anybody did anything wrong. It's just an extra set of eyes on it. So getting back to that indictment, that's an extra set of eyes to kind of hopefully prevent that type of activity. And Audit also does their own review as well. And there's a lot of other additional tests besides the merchant codes. And some of the new things that we added into it just recently, we're now doing documentation checks to make sure the proper documentation is filled out. Again, getting back to that indictment, this ensures that whoever's using the purchasing card is filling out the proper paperwork and getting the proper checks. For example, some of the things we look at are purchases over 500. There should be some type of documentation that's filled out, and this script checks to make sure that happens. Over $2,500, there's, again, additional sign-offs that's needed. And some of the additional things that we plan on adding to this is we're now extracting the GL code, so in the future, we're going to check to see if it's assigned properly. And currently, we just look month to month to month, just take a snapshot. We're going to start gathering more information and start doing a trend analysis and dashboards. We're in the process, and the script's actually written to add Amazon, because Amazon's merchant code is bookstore, and that's pretty useless. But Amazon has their own portal that they provide us with a category code. So how we're looking at merchant codes for PNC, we're going to start looking at category codes for Amazon, and we've provided a list of those codes to the management, and they're going to provide the ones that they want flagged, and then we can just plug it into the script because it's more or less completely written. Now go on the, oops, did I skip one? Okay, revenue collection. The objective here is to evaluate and to provide assurance customer fares are collected, reconciled, and posted and deposited to the bank. Last meeting, we were doing that quarterly. We have since switched to doing this monthly. So we now update management. We run the script monthly, and we update and we share the results with management. And if we find a discrepancy, we don't wait until the audit is completed. If we find something, we send it to them right away. And the revenue manager is usually she's on it. More times than not, if I send something to them, they've already found it, they've already documented, they send it back to us, and then we record it in our audit management software. So some of our upcoming plans for this is we're going to start looking at the mobile app sales. Payroll, the objective is to evaluate the payroll data from the authority's ERP system. Last meeting, we had the script written, but we were working on fine-tuning some of the thresholds. For example, like deductions, where they went to the threshold of that, for that, worked hours, and excessive OT. That has been completed, and now it's being executed monthly, and the results are shared with management. And the last one I have here is nepotism. The purpose is to evaluate relationships of GCRTA's employment for conflicts and reporting structure. This one in the past was almost all completely manual. You know, the software we had exported a lot of data, and it got dumped into a spreadsheet, and there was a lot of joins and those types of things in Excel. And I think this one, this is one that took like 9 different databases. You wouldn't think nepotism would take that much, but it does. This process has now been completely automated, and it can be ran on demand as needed. And it flags all relationships automatically. And what we need to do now is just work with management on what frequency it needs to be run. Is it quarterly or monthly? I'm not sure. But the last quarter's updates have been run, and they will be shared with management. And that's all I have for continuous. I'll invite Tony back up. Oh, any questions?
Thank you, Randy, and I'll wrap up here. We have a few more sections of work that we completed. Our work as we function as the Inspector General for the authority. We had 2 special requests in our emerging issues we worked on during the last quarter. One was an incompatible employment matter where we completed this work. We met with district management and corrective actions were put in place. No matters for the board attention. We are currently working on reviewing the methodology where transit police completes their internal affairs investigations, which was another request. That's still in progress. Moving forward here, at the bottom of the page, you see that we still have some requirements. One requirement is to coordinate our work with external auditors. We did report on these projects earlier, and these 3 audits with external auditors have been issued. Another requirement is for us to track all outstanding issues in our audit management system and follow up with management. We continue to do that. We have a robust tracking system where we are following up with management. Other projects, Darren Garlock alluded to this earlier. When he's finished with his dependent eligibility review, then we'll be moving towards a claims expense audit, auditing both our previous third-party administrator, Medical Mutual, and our current third-party administrator, Anthem. And we'll be working with a healthcare audit consultant to complete that work. Other projects, we do work on, we sit on some steering committees to share our knowledge, learn about risk. You see here it includes the Change Order Review Committee, which I talked about earlier. Our staff had the following training during the quarter. We have some training requirements also outlined in our audit manual and in our standards, and we do our best to comply with that. And then our last slide is to answer any questions or receive any comments from the committee or anyone else in the room. Mayor Kumar?
Any questions from committee members? No questions. No, Tony, thank you very much. Team, thank you very much for all your presentations as well. And I think it was a very complete overview, so appreciate the update.
Thank you.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.